In a small, sleepy town surrounded by thick forests and rolling hills, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The residents were friendly, the streets quiet, and the air carried the faint scent of pine trees all year round. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. But for Ethan Carter, this seemingly idyllic town held a dark mystery that had haunted him since childhood. Ethan was in his early 30s with sharp features and eyes that always seemed to carry a hint of sadness. He lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town, far enough from the center to avoid prying eyes, but close enough to remain connected to the community. His life had been shaped by one constant presence: his mother, Margaret. Growing up, Ethan's relationship with her was complicated. Margaret wasn't like other mothers in the neighborhood. While other kids came home to warm hugs and homemade cookies, Ethan often found himself waiting hours for his mother to return from wherever she disappeared to. She was distant, preoccupied, and sometimes even cold, leaving young Ethan feeling abandoned and confused. Despite her aloofness, Ethan loved his mother deeply. He remembered moments when she would sit by his bedside, brushing his hair back as he drifted off to sleep, or when she sang softly to calm him during thunderstorms. Those fleeting glimpses of warmth made him hold on to hope that someday they would have the close bond he craved. But as he grew older, those moments became rarer, replaced instead by silence and unanswered questions. Margaret never explained why she spent so much time away, or what she did when she left. Her evasiveness only fueled Ethan's curiosity and his frustration. Then 5 years ago, everything changed. Margaret passed away suddenly, leaving behind more questions than answers. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but something about it didn't sit right with Ethan. For starters, Margaret had always been in good health. She walked every morning, ate well, and rarely complained about physical ailments. How could her heart just give out? Rumors began circulating around town almost immediately after her funeral. Some whispered that she had been involved in something dangerous, while others hinted at foul play. No one dared to say anything outright, but the unease lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. At first, Ethan tried to push these thoughts aside. Grief consumed him, and he threw himself into work, burying his emotions under piles of paperwork and late-night projects. But as time passed, the nagging feeling that something was wrong refused to fade. It started with dreams. Vivid, unsettling, dreams where Margaret appeared to him calling out his name. In these dreams, she stood in shadowy places, her face pale and drawn, pleading with him to find me. At first, Ethan dismissed them as nothing more than stress-induced hallucinations, but the dreams persisted, growing clearer and more urgent with each passing night. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, Ethan stumbled upon an envelope tucked inside a dusty photo album. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but his name was scrawled across the front in shaky handwriting. Curious, he opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter inside was brief, but chilling. Your mother's grave holds the truth. You must dig deeper if you want answers. There was no signature, no explanation, just those cryptic words staring back at him. Ethan's hands trembled as he read the note over and over again. Was this some kind of cruel prank, or was it a genuine warning? Either way, the message ignited a fire within him. All the unanswered questions, the strange rumors, the haunting dreams, it all felt connected somehow. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan decided to act. He began researching burial laws, trying to figure out how to legally exhume his mother's grave. He visited the local cemetery office, explaining his situation and requesting permission to open the casket, but the response he received was firm and unyielding. Disturbing a grave without proper justification was strictly prohibited. Frustrated but undeterred, Ethan turned to others for support. He reached out to his estranged sister, Claire, hoping she might understand his need to investigate further. Claire, however, was skeptical. She reminded him that their mother's death had been ruled natural, and digging up old wounds wouldn't bring her back. When Ethan showed her the anonymous letter, she dismissed it as nonsense, accusing him of letting grief cloud his judgment. Their conversation ended in an argument, leaving Ethan feeling more isolated than ever. As days turned into weeks, Ethan's obsession with the mystery deepened. He couldn't shake the image of his mother standing in the shadows, begging him to find her. Every night he replayed the dreams in his mind, searching for clues he might have missed. During the day, he scoured the internet for information on similar cases, reading stories of missing bodies, secret societies, and unexplained phenomena. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that Margaret's death wasn't what it seemed. Finally, unable to bear the weight of uncertainty any longer, Ethan made a decision. If no one else would help him, he would take matters into his own hands. Late one evening, armed with a flashlight, gloves, and a shovel, he slipped out of his house and headed toward the cemetery. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the gravestones as he approached his mother's plot. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and determination driving him forward. He knew this was risky, not just legally, but emotionally. But he couldn't turn back. Now, whatever lay beneath the soil, he needed to know the truth. With trembling hands, Ethan began digging, each thrust of the shovel bringing him closer to answers, or perhaps to something far darker than he could imagine. Ethan's decision to dig up his mother's grave wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of weeks of sleepless nights, relentless research, and an overwhelming sense that he was being pulled toward something larger than himself. But as he stood in the cemetery under the cold light of the moon, reality began to sink in. What if he found nothing? What if the anonymous letter was just a cruel joke meant to torment him further? And what if someone caught him? The thought of facing legal consequences, or worse, ridicule, gnawed at the edges of his mind. Yet the image of his mother calling out to him in his dreams wouldn't let him stop. The first few shovelfuls of dirt came away easily enough. But as Ethan dug deeper, the work became harder and more exhausting. His muscles burned, sweat dripped down his face despite the chilly night air, and his breaths grew heavier with every thrust of the shovel. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity. Each strike against the earth felt like peeling back another layer of mystery, inching closer to the truth buried beneath. The silence of the cemetery was broken only by the sound of his labored breathing and the metallic scrape of the shovel meeting soil. Hours passed, though it felt like mere minutes to Ethan, who was completely absorbed in the task. Finally, the tip of the shovel struck something solid, a dull thud that echoed through the stillness. Ethan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the loose dirt with trembling hands until the top of the coffin emerged into view. It was old and weathered, its surface marked with streaks of rust and decay. For a moment he hesitated, staring at it as if expecting it to move or speak. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever answers lay inside would either confirm his worst fears or put his restless mind at ease. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan pried open the coffin lid. The hinges groaned in protest, releasing a faint metallic squeal that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet night. As the lid creaked open, Ethan leaned forward, bracing himself for what he might see. At first, all he could make out was darkness, an empty void where his mother's remains should have been. Then slowly details began to emerge. Instead of a body wrapped in burial clothes, the coffin contained scraps of old newspapers, clumps of dirt, and a single red rose lying atop the pile. Ethan blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. He reached inside, picking up the rose and turning it over in his hands. Its petals were brittle and dry, as though it had been placed there years ago. Shock rippled through him, followed quickly by anger. Someone had lied to him. Someone had gone to great lengths to fake his mother's death, and they had succeeded. For 5 long years he had mourned her, visited her grave, and carried the weight of her absence only to discover now that she wasn't even there. A surge of betrayal coursed through him, fueling his resolve. He couldn't keep this to himself, not anymore. Whoever was responsible needed to be held accountable. Grabbing his phone from his pocket, Ethan dialed the emergency number with shaking fingers. When the operator answered, he struggled to steady his voice as he explained the situation. "I'm at the cemetery," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. My mother's grave. I opened the coffin, and there's no body. Something isn't right here. The operator tried to calm him down, asking questions about his location and why he was at the cemetery so late at night. Ethan did his best to explain without sounding unhinged, but he could tell the operator was skeptical. Still, she promised to send officers to investigate. While waiting for the police to arrive, Ethan paced nervously around the gravesite, replaying the events of the past hour in his mind. How had this happened? Who could have orchestrated such an elaborate deception? And where was Margaret now? The questions swirled endlessly, leaving him dizzy with confusion. He glanced at the coffin again, noticing for the first time the strange symbols carved into the underside of the lid. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably deliberate. Intricate patterns resembling vines intertwined with unfamiliar shapes formed a border along the edges. Ethan didn't recognize them, but they sent a chill running down his spine. Were these some kind of code? A message meant for him? Or evidence of something far darker? When the police finally arrived, their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the scene like a spotlight. Two officers approached cautiously, their expressions a mix of concern and suspicion. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, introduced himself as Officer Harris and asked Ethan to explain what had happened. Ethan recounted everything: the dreams, the anonymous letter, the discovery of the empty coffin, all while trying to maintain his composure. The second officer, a younger woman named Detective Meyer, listened intently, jotting notes in a small notebook. Detective Meyer examined the coffin closely, taking photographs and inspecting the symbols on the lid. She furrowed her brow, clearly intrigued but also cautious. "These markings don't look like anything standard for funerals," she remarked, glancing at Ethan. "Do you know what they mean?" Ethan shook his head, explaining that he had never seen them before tonight. Meanwhile, Officer Harris questioned Ethan about his motives for digging up the grave. Though polite, his tone carried an edge of skepticism, as though he suspected Ethan might be mentally unstable. Ethan understood their hesitation. He knew how absurd the story sounded, but he pleaded with them to take it seriously. "I'm not making this up," he insisted. "Someone faked my mother's death, and I need to find out why." The officers conferred quietly before deciding to secure the area and launch a formal investigation. They assured Ethan they would look into the matter thoroughly, though they couldn't promise immediate answers. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Detective Meyer handed Ethan her card. "If you remember anything else, or if you hear from whoever sent that letter, call me," she said firmly. Ethan nodded, clutching the card tightly as he watched them drive away. Back home, Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall. The adrenaline that had fueled him earlier had worn off, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. He replayed the officers' reactions in his mind, wondering whether they truly believed him or thought he was losing his grip on reality. Either way, he knew he couldn't rely solely on them to uncover the truth. If he wanted answers, he would have to dig deeper, literally and figuratively. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into researching the symbols he'd found on the coffin. He scoured books on ancient languages, occult practices, and local folklore, hoping to find a match. At the same time, he revisited old memories of his mother, searching for any clues he might have overlooked. He remembered how she used to disappear for hours, sometimes days, claiming she was visiting friends or attending meetings. He recalled the way she would lock herself in her study, emerging only when called for meals. And then there were the strange artifacts she kept hidden in drawers, small trinkets etched with similar symbols to those on the coffin. Each new piece of information brought Ethan closer to understanding the scope of the mystery, but it also raised more questions. Why had Margaret been involved with whatever group created those symbols? What had she done to warrant such an elaborate cover-up of her supposed death? And most importantly, where was she now? The possibility that she might still be alive somewhere filled Ethan with both hope and dread. If she was alive, she could be in danger, or worse, complicit in something sinister. Either way, he vowed to keep searching until he uncovered the full truth. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's determination hardened into obsession. He stopped caring about appearances, focusing instead on unraveling the tangled web surrounding his mother's disappearance. Friends and neighbors noticed the change in him, his disheveled appearance, his distracted demeanor, the way he seemed to vanish for hours at a time. Some whispered behind his back, speculating about his mental state. Others avoided him altogether, unsure of how to approach someone so consumed by grief and paranoia. Only Claire, his estranged sister, attempted to reach out, though her efforts were met with resistance. "You're chasing ghosts, Ethan," she told him during one heated phone call. "Whatever happened to Mom, it's over. Let her rest." But Ethan couldn't let go. Not yet. Every clue he uncovered, no matter how small, reinforced his belief that Margaret's story wasn't finished. The empty coffin, the cryptic symbols, the rumors swirling around town, they all pointed to something far bigger than he had initially imagined. And as much as he feared what he might find, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't stop until he found his mother, or the truth about what had happened to her. Ethan's discovery of the empty coffin and the strange symbols carved into its lid left him with more questions than answers. The police had promised to investigate, but their cautious demeanor suggested they weren't entirely convinced of the gravity of the situation. Ethan couldn't blame them. After all, how often did someone dig up a grave only to find it empty? Still, he knew he couldn't rely solely on them to uncover the truth. If he wanted answers, he would have to take matters into his own hands. Our first step was deciphering the symbols. They were intricate, almost hypnotic in their design, with swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Ethan spent hours poring over books about ancient languages, religious iconography, and even conspiracy theories. He visited libraries, scoured online forums, and reached out to experts in obscure fields, hoping someone could shed light on what the markings meant. At first, his efforts yielded nothing. The symbols didn't match any known language or code, leaving him frustrated and disheartened. But then, during a late-night search, he stumbled upon something promising. A blog post, written by a historian specializing in esoteric practices. The post described a secretive group that operated in small towns across the country, using cryptic symbols to communicate and mark significant locations. According to the historian, these groups dabbled in rituals rooted in mysticism, claiming to harness powers beyond human understanding. Ethan's heart raced as he read the article. Could Margaret have been involved with such a group? It would explain her frequent absences, her secretive nature, and perhaps even her disappearance. Determined to learn more, Ethan tracked down the historian, a retired professor named Dr. Evelyn Hart, who lived in a neighboring town. When he arrived at her modest home, she greeted him with a warm smile and invited him inside. Her living room was cluttered with books, artifacts, and maps, giving it the feel of a private museum. After explaining his situation and showing her photos of the coffin symbols, Dr. Hart studied them intently, her brow furrowing in concentration. "These are unmistakably tied to a sect known as the Order of Eternal Dawn," she said finally, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. "They're not well documented because they operate in secrecy, but from what little we know, they believe in transcending mortality through ritualistic practices." She went on to describe how the group recruited members under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, only to involve them in increasingly dangerous activities. Some claimed the rituals required sacrifices, while others spoke of binding pacts made with unseen forces. Ethan listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. Was Margaret coerced into joining this group? Had she tried to leave, prompting them to fake her death? Dr. Hart handed Ethan a folder containing photocopies of documents related to the sect, including eyewitness accounts and sketches of similar symbols found in other locations. Among the papers was a map marked with several sites where the group was rumored to gather. One location stood out: an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, less than 10 miles from Ethan's hometown. According to the notes, the cabin had once served as a meeting place for the sect before being abandoned decades ago. Though no one had seen activity there in years, locals still avoided the area, claiming it was cursed. Armed with this new information, Ethan decided to visit the cabin. He packed a backpack with essentials, a flashlight, water, a notebook, and a camera, and set off early the next morning. The journey to the cabin was grueling, requiring him to navigate narrow dirt paths and thick underbrush. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and an eerie stillness settled around him. Birds stopped chirping, and the rustling of leaves seemed to fade, leaving behind an unnatural silence. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. The cabin itself was decrepit, its wooden walls warped and splintered with age. Windows were shattered and the roof sagged dangerously in places. Despite its dilapidated state, there was something unsettling about it, a sense of foreboding that made Ethan hesitate before stepping inside. Pushing aside his unease, he entered, cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The interior was cluttered with debris, broken furniture, piles of rotting wood, and remnants of old fires. But amidst the chaos, Ethan noticed signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints marred the dusty floor, and a faint smell of incense lingered in the air. As he explored further, Ethan discovered a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, he found a leather-bound journal wrapped in a faded cloth. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing pages filled with Margaret's handwriting. The entries detailed her involvement with the sect, starting as a curious outsider drawn to their promises of spiritual awakening. Over time, however, her tone shifted from fascination to fear. She wrote about witnessing rituals that defied explanation, feeling trapped by vows she couldn't break and fearing for her life when she tried to leave. In one particularly chilling entry, she described a confrontation with the group's leader, who warned her that abandoning the sect would come at a terrible cost, not just for her, but for her family. Ethan's chest tightened as he read the final entry, dated shortly before her supposed death. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone," she wrote. "They've taken everything from me, but I refuse to let them win. Find me, Ethan. Please, you're the only one who can stop them." Tears welled in his eyes as he closed the journal, overwhelmed by a mix of grief and determination. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She had been fighting for her life, and now it was up to him to finish what she started. Before he could process everything he'd learned, Ethan heard a sound outside, the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. His heart leapt into his throat as he extinguished his flashlight and crouched behind a pile of debris. Peering through a crack in the wall, he saw a figure approaching the cabin, cloaked in a hooded robe. The person moved slowly, deliberately, as if searching for something, or someone. Panic gripped Ethan as he realized he might have been followed. He clutched the journal tightly, knowing it held vital clues, but also aware that it could make him a target. The figure paused at the entrance, silhouetted against the fading light. For a moment, everything was still. Then a low, gravelly voice called out, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan froze, unsure whether to respond or remain silent. The voice continued, softer this time but laced with menace. "This is sacred ground. Leave now, or face the consequences." Whoever it was clearly knew Ethan was inside, and they weren't alone. As the figure stepped closer, Ethan caught a glimpse of a tattoo on their hand, a symbol identical to the ones carved into the coffin. Though terrified, Ethan refused to back down. Clutching the journal, he stood up slowly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I know what you've done," he said, addressing the figure. "My mother trusted you, and you betrayed her. Where is she?" The response was immediate, a sharp intake of breath followed by a menacing laugh. "Your mother made her choice," the figure replied. "And so must you. Walk away while you still can." But Ethan wasn't about to walk away. Not now. Not when he was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. With the journal tucked safely under his arm, he prepared himself for whatever came next, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. but also determined to see it through, no matter the cost. Ethan's confrontation with the hooded figure at the abandoned cabin marked a turning point in his journey. The figure's ominous warning lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Yet, instead of retreating as advised, Ethan stood his ground, clutching the journal like a lifeline. He knew he was treading dangerous waters, but the stakes were too high to back down now. His mother's life, or perhaps her freedom, depended on him. The figure stepped closer, their movements deliberate and calculated. Though their face remained obscured beneath the shadow of the hood, Ethan could feel their piercing gaze boring into him. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," the figure said, their voice low and gravelly. "This isn't some game. Leave this place or you'll regret it." Despite the chill running down his spine, Ethan refused to budge. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," he shot back, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear beneath. "And what did you do to my mother? Where is she?" For a moment there was silence, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves outside. Then the figure let out a humorless laugh. "Your mother brought this upon herself," they said coldly. "She chose to walk away from us, and that choice came with consequences. You'd be wise to learn from her mistakes." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't believe for a second that Margaret had willingly abandoned him. Everything he had read in her journal pointed to coercion, manipulation, and outright fear. She hadn't walked away. She had tried to escape, and failed. Determined to push further, Ethan held up the journal. "This belongs to my mother," he said, his voice rising slightly. "It tells me everything I need to know about your so-called order. If you think I'm going to stop looking for her just because you tell me to, you're wrong." The figure hesitated, seemingly caught off guard by Ethan's boldness. For a brief second, Ethan thought he saw uncertainty flicker across their face. Or maybe it was anger. Either way, the tension in the room grew palpable. "You're meddling in things you can't possibly comprehend," the figure finally replied, taking another step forward. "Do you even know what we seek? What we protect?" Ethan shook his head defiantly. "I don't care about your rituals or whatever twisted beliefs you cling to. All I care about is finding my mother and making sure you never hurt anyone else." Again. The figure paused, tilting their head slightly as if considering Ethan's words. Then, without warning, they reached into the folds of their robe and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was no bigger than a jewelry case, but its surface was covered in the same cryptic symbols Ethan had seen on the coffin lid and in Margaret's journal. "If you truly want answers," the figure said, holding the box out toward him, "then take this. But beware, it may lead you somewhere you cannot return from." Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to trust the gesture. Was this a trap? A test? Or simply another layer of deception designed to throw him off course? His instincts screamed caution, but curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he extended his hand and took the box. As soon as his fingers brushed against it, a strange sensation coursed through him, a mix of warmth and unease, as though the object itself carried an energy he couldn't explain. The figure watched him intently, their expression unreadable. "Open when you're ready," they said cryptically before turning and disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Ethan called after them, demanding more answers, but the only response was the sound of receding footsteps fading into the night. Left alone in the cabin, he stared at the box in his hands, its weight both literal and metaphorical pressing down on him. Whatever secrets it contained, he knew it would bring him one step closer to uncovering the truth about his mother, and the sinister organization that had ensnared her. Back home, Ethan examined the box carefully, turning it over in his hands as he sat at his kitchen table. It was locked, with no visible keyhole or mechanism to open it. Frustrated but undeterred, he began searching for ways to unlock it. He scoured online forums, consulted experts in antique artifacts, and even attempted to pick the lock using tools he borrowed from a neighbor. Nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: tiny etchings along the edges of the box, almost invisible unless held at the right angle, They formed a pattern, a sequence, of symbols matching those on the coffin and in Margaret's journal. Realization dawned on Ethan. The box wasn't meant to be opened physically. It required a code, likely derived from the symbols themselves. Returning to the journal, he flipped through the pages, studying every entry for clues. Margaret had written extensively about the sect's practices, including references to keys, hidden within their teachings. One passage stood out in particular. To unlock the truth, one must follow the path of light and shadow. At first, Ethan dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but now it seemed significant. Could it be a riddle, pointing to the solution? He spent hours analyzing the symbols, arranging them in different combinations based on their shapes and positions. Finally, after countless attempts, he stumbled upon the correct sequence. The box clicked softly, and its lid sprang open. Inside was a folded piece of parchment and a small vial filled with a dark liquid. Ethan's heart raced as he unfolded the parchment. It contained a map, a crude but detailed sketch of the town and surrounding areas, with several locations marked by X's. Beneath the map were instructions written in Latin. Though Ethan didn't speak the language fluently, he recognized enough to decipher fragments of the text. Seek the sanctuary, where the veil is thinnest. Reveal the truth. The vial, meanwhile, puzzled him. Its contents shimmered faintly, catching the light in an almost otherworldly way. Was it poison? Medicine? Something else entirely? Unsure how to proceed, Ethan decided to focus on the map first. The marked locations included the cemetery where Margaret's empty grave lay, the abandoned cabin, and a third site he didn't recognize, an old church on the outskirts of town. According to the map, the church was connected to an underground chamber accessible only through a hidden entrance. Ethan's mind raced as he pieced together the clues. The church made sense. It was a central hub for the community and a logical meeting place for a secretive group. If the sect had been using it as a base of operations, it might hold evidence of Margaret's whereabouts. With renewed determination, Ethan grabbed his backpack and headed to the church early the next morning. The building was ancient, its stone walls weathered by time and neglect. Unlike the bustling churches in the town center, this one stood isolated, surrounded by overgrown grass and crumbling headstones. Ethan approached cautiously, scanning the area for signs of activity. The front doors were locked, but a side window proved easy enough to pry open. Climbing inside, he found himself in a dimly lit nave, the air thick with dust and the scent of mildew. Pews lined either side of the aisle, leading up to a dilapidated altar adorned with faded religious iconography. As Ethan explored the interior, he noticed odd details that hinted at the church's darker history. Symbols similar to those on the coffin and the box were carved into the walls, partially concealed by layers of paint. In one corner, he discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Heart pounding, he lifted the hatch and descended into the darkness below. The underground chamber was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Lit by flickering torches mounted on the walls, it resembled a cross between a crypt and an occult shrine. Strange artifacts littered the space. Daggers inscribed with runes, jars containing unidentifiable substances, and altars draped with black cloth. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a book bound in leather. Its cover bore the same swirling patterns as the symbols Ethan had been chasing all along. Approaching the book, Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, to turn back before he uncovered something he couldn't handle. But the thought of his mother kept him rooted in place. Opening the book, he found pages filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and incantations. Many of the entries referred to individuals by name, including Margaret Carter. According to the records, she had been initiated into the sect years ago but later attempted to sever ties. Her defiance had marked her as a traitor, and the group had staged her death to silence her permanently. But the most chilling revelation came at the end of the book, a list of names accompanied by dates and locations. Beside each name was a notation, indicating whether the individual had been redeemed or preserved. Margaret's name was listed under the latter category, with coordinates pointing to a location deep within the forest. Ethan's blood ran cold. Preserved could mean only one thing. They had kept her alive, imprisoned somewhere as punishment for her betrayal. With the book clutched tightly in his arms, Ethan climbed back to the surface, his resolve stronger than ever. He now had proof of the sect's existence and their involvement in his mother's disappearance. But more importantly, he had a lead, a chance to find her and bring her home. Little did he know, however, that his actions had not gone unnoticed. Somewhere in the shadows, the hooded figures watched and waited, preparing to ensure that Ethan's quest ended exactly as they intended. Ethan emerged from the underground chamber beneath the old church, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. The leather-bound book in his hands felt heavier than ever, not just because of its physical weight, but because of the secrets it contained. Margaret's name, marked as preserved, along with coordinates pointing deep into the forest, confirmed that she was still alive. But the cryptic notations and ominous tone of the records left Ethan uneasy. What did preserved truly mean? Was she being held captive, or had something far worse happened to her? The thought of his mother trapped somewhere against her will fueled a fire within him. He couldn't waste another moment. Armed with the map from the wooden box and the newly acquired book, Ethan plotted a course to the location indicated by the coordinates. It was a remote part of the forest, far from any trails or landmarks, accessible only to those who knew where to look. As he prepared for the journey, packing essentials like food, water, and a flashlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside his window sent his heart racing. Paranoia crept in, whispering doubts about whether he was ready for what lay ahead. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ethan set out. The forest greeted him with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds and the crunch of twigs underfoot. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of damp earth filled his nostrils. As he ventured deeper, the trees grew, denser, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. Shadows danced across the ground, distorting shapes and making it difficult to discern reality from imagination. Following the map closely, Ethan navigated through the labyrinth of trees and underbrush. Hours passed, and the landscape became increasingly desolate. The vibrant greens of moss and ferns gave way to barren patches of dirt and jagged rocks. It was as though the forest itself was warning him to turn back. Yet Ethan pressed on, driven by the image of his mother calling out to him in his dreams. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the spot marked on the map, a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their trunks blackened as if scorched by fire. At first glance, the area appeared unremarkable, just another stretch of wilderness. But as Ethan scanned his surroundings, he noticed subtle signs of human interference. A large boulder near the center of the clearing seemed out of place, its surface unnaturally smooth compared to the rough textures of the surrounding stones. Upon closer inspection, Ethan discovered faint grooves etched into the rock, symbols, identical to those he had seen throughout his investigation. His pulse quickened. This had to be it. Using all his strength, Ethan pushed against the boulder, expecting resistance. To his surprise, it shifted easily, revealing a narrow opening in the ground below. A ladder made of rotting wood led downward, into darkness. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Ethan descended cautiously, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the oppressive gloom. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it a faint metallic smell that made his stomach churn. At the bottom of the ladder, he found himself in a cramped tunnel. The walls were lined with crude carvings, more symbols, some overlapping, others creating a chaotic tapestry of lines and shapes. The floor was uneven, forcing Ethan to tread carefully to avoid tripping over loose stones. After several minutes of navigating the winding passage, he reached a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bars. Pushing it open, he entered a cavernous space unlike anything he had anticipated. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of cells lined the walls, their barred doors hanging slightly ajar. Inside each cell, remnants of past occupants lingered, tattered blankets, broken furniture, and scraps of clothing. It was a prison, hidden away from the world, designed to hold those the sect deemed unworthy of freedom. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he moved from cell to cell, searching for any sign of Margaret. His hope wavered with each empty room, dread creeping in as he feared he might be too late. Then, in the farthest corner of the chamber, he saw her. Slumped against the back wall of a cell, her figure frail and ghostly pale, was Margaret. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face gaunt from years of confinement. She looked up at him with hollow eyes, disbelief flickering across her expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, tears streaming down his face as he reached through the bars to touch her hand. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely. "It's me. I'm here." Margaret blinked slowly, as if trying to process whether this was real or another cruel trick played by her captors. When recognition finally dawned, she let out a sob, clutching his fingers, weakly. "Ethan, is it really you?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. He nodded fervently, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I won't leave without you." But freeing her wouldn't be easy. The cell door was locked, and the keyhole was rusted shut. Desperate, Ethan searched the surrounding area for tools or anything he could use to pry it open. That's when he noticed a small table tucked away in a recess of the cavern. On it lay a collection of items, a ring of keys, a dagger, and a vial identical to the one he had found in the wooden box. Grabbing the keys, he hurried back to the cell and began trying them one by one. Each failed attempt felt like a punch to the gut. But finally, the lock clicked and the door swung open. Helping Margaret to her feet, Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, supporting her as they made their way back toward the ladder. She moved slowly, her legs trembling with disuse, but determination burned in her eyes. "We have to hurry," she urged, her voice gaining strength. "They'll know we're gone soon." Ethan didn't need to ask who they were. He already knew. The hooded figures, the sect that had orchestrated her imprisonment. As they climbed out of the underground lair and emerged into the forest once more, Ethan felt a surge of relief. They were free, or so he thought. Before they could take more than a few steps, a chilling sound echoed through the trees, the low hum of chanting, growing louder with each passing second. Turning around, Ethan saw shadows moving between the trees, figures cloaked in robes, their faces obscured. At their center stood the same person who had confronted him at the cabin, now holding the wooden box he had left behind. "You should have listened," the figure said, their voice dripping with menace. "Now, you've sealed your fate, and hers." Ethan tightened his grip on Margaret, shielding her with his body. He wasn't about to let them take her again, not after everything they'd been through. Whatever came next, he vowed to fight with everything he had. The forest, once a place of eerie stillness, now pulsed with an unsettling energy as the hooded figures closed in around Ethan and Margaret. Their chanting grew louder, rhythmic and hypnotic, echoing off the trees like a sinister lullaby. Each step they took seemed deliberate, calculated, as if they were herding Ethan and Margaret into a trap. The figure at the center, the same one who had confronted Ethan at the cabin, held the wooden box aloft, its dark surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Ethan's grip on his mother tightened, his mind racing for a way out. He couldn't fight them all, but he also couldn't surrender, not when they were so close to freedom. "Stay behind me," Ethan whispered to Margaret, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. She nodded weakly, leaning heavily on his arm as they backed away slowly. The hooded figures formed a semicircle around them, their movements synchronized, almost ritualistic. Ethan scanned the area, searching for any opening, a gap in their formation, a path to escape. But the dense trees blocked every direction. They were surrounded, trapped like prey cornered by predators. The leader stepped forward, lowering the box slightly as they addressed Ethan. "You've meddled in forces beyond your understanding," they said, their tone calm but laced with venom. Your mother broke our laws, and you've compounded her sins by defying us. There is no redemption for either of you." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to respond, to argue or plead, but words failed him. Instead, he focused on keeping Margaret steady, his eyes darting between the figures for any sign of aggression. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the hooded figures faltered, hesitating mid-step as if struck by doubt. Ethan caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and seized the opportunity. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chanting like a knife. "What gives you the right to decide who lives or dies, who suffers or is free?" His words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. For a moment, silence fell over the group, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The hesitation among the figures deepened, some exchanging uneasy glances beneath their hoods. It was clear that not everyone shared the leader's unwavering conviction. Sensing weakness, Ethan pressed on. "Do you really believe in what you're doing?" he asked, his voice rising. "Or are you just following orders because you're afraid to question them?" His gaze swept across the group, lingering on the ones who seemed uncertain. "If you let us go, no one has to get hurt. You can walk away from this." The leader turned sharply toward the wavering members, snapping at them in a sharp, commanding tone. "Silence," they barked. "This is not your decision to make." But the damage was done. Doubt had taken root, spreading like cracks in a dam. One figure stepped back, pulling their hood down to reveal a young woman with wide, frightened eyes. "We shouldn't be doing this," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It's wrong." Her declaration sparked a ripple effect, causing others to lower their hoods and mutter in agreement. Seizing the chaos, Ethan grabbed Margaret's hand and bolted. The two stumbled through the underbrush, dodging branches and leaping over roots as the sounds of shouting erupted behind them. The leader screamed orders, trying to rally the remaining loyalists, but their numbers were dwindling. Ethan pushed, himself harder than ever before, driven by adrenaline and the knowledge that this might be their only chance to escape. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the forest, bursting into the open fields beyond. The fresh air hit them like a wave, carrying with it the promise of safety. Ethan didn't stop running until they reached the main road, where he flagged down a passing car. The driver, startled but compassionate, agreed to take them to the nearest police station. By the time they arrived, Ethan could barely stand, his legs burning from exertion and his lungs aching from the cold night air. But none of that mattered. They were safe, or as safe as they could be given the circumstances. At the station, Ethan recounted everything to Detective Meyer, who had been investigating Margaret's case since the discovery of the empty coffin. She listened intently, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock as he described the underground prison, the sect, and their narrow escape. Though parts of his story sounded unbelievable, the evidence spoke for itself. The leather-bound book, the map, and the vial of mysterious liquid served as undeniable proof of the sect's existence. With this new information, the police launched a full-scale operation to locate and dismantle the organization. In the days that followed, raids were conducted on multiple sites linked to the sect, including the old church and the abandoned cabin. Several members were arrested while others fled, disappearing into the shadows. Among those captured was the leader, whose identity was revealed to be Father Gregory, a respected figure in the community. His arrest sent shockwaves through the town, shattering the illusion of peace and exposing the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface for years. As the investigation unfolded, Margaret began to heal, both physically and emotionally. Years of captivity had left scars, but being reunited with Ethan gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Together they worked with authorities to provide testimony against the sect, ensuring that justice would be served. Though the road ahead was long, they faced it side by side, rebuilding the bond that had been fractured by secrets and lies. For Ethan, the experience changed him in ways he never anticipated. He had started this journey seeking answers, but he ended it with something far greater: closure. The dreams of his mother calling out to him ceased, replaced by peaceful nights filled with restful sleep. and though the memories of what he had endured would always linger, they no longer haunted him. Instead, they served as a reminder of his strength and the unbreakable connection he shared with Margaret. In the end, the truth came to light, dispelling the shadows that had clouded their lives for so long. Ethan and Margaret emerged stronger, their bond forged anew in the fires of adversity. And as they stood together, watching the sunrise over the horizon, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family.